I want to start with something that didn't make the top of the headlines, but should have. On a Tuesday night in late February 2026, residents across multiple Israeli cities spent the night sprinting between their homes and bomb shelters. Not once, not twice. Over and over again, for hours. Air raid sirens cycled without stopping as Iranian salvos kept arriving in waves. One woman in the Tel Aviv district caught shrapnel. The intercept trails lit up the night sky like a strobe light above Jerusalem. What struck me looking at this wasn't the drama of it. It was the sheer grinding exhaustion baked into the footage. This wasn't a one-night escalation. This was a sustained pressure campaign, and Iran was making sure ordinary Israelis felt every second of it. But here's what Iran miscalculated. The United States had already quietly loaded its most feared aircraft and pointed them east. That aircraft was the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, and what it did over Iran in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury is something I don't think most people have fully absorbed yet. Most people remember shock and awe from March 2003, the televised thunder over Baghdad that opened the Iraq War. I remember watching it as a teenager thinking nothing could ever top that level of coordinated military power. I was wrong. Admiral Brad Cooper of U.S. Central Command publicly stated that in the first 24 hours of Operation Epic Fury, the combined U.S.-Israeli strike package was nearly double the scale of those 2003 opening strikes. And by the time Cooper gave that briefing, less than 100 hours into the operation, CENTCOM had already hit close to 2,000 separate targets using more than 2,000 munitions. To put that another way, they were striking Iran at a pace of roughly one target every 3 minutes, around the clock. Cooper also confirmed that American forces had destroyed hundreds of Iran's ballistic missiles, launchers, and drone systems, along with 17 Iranian naval vessels. The phrase he used to summarize the mission was disarmingly direct. They were focused on destroying everything that could fire back at them. That sentence is worth sitting with for a moment. Not degrading capabilities, not neutralizing infrastructure. Everything that can shoot at us. It reads less like a military briefing and more like the philosophy of someone who has already decided how this ends. Here's where I want to push back on the way this story is being covered elsewhere. Most reporting frames the B-2 deployment as a dramatic escalation, America pulling out its biggest card. That framing misses the point entirely. The B-2 wasn't deployed because the US wanted to send a message. It was deployed because Iran had built something that only the B-2 could crack. Hardened underground missile cave complexes dug deep into mountain ranges, some with launch apertures that allow ballistic missiles to be fired directly from inside the rock. Iran had even released a propaganda video in late March 2025, an 85-second clip that was intended to project power, that actually revealed a critical vulnerability. The missiles stored inside those caves had no blast doors, no meaningful internal protection. Chain reaction detonations were theoretically possible with a precise enough strike at the right entry point. The US didn't need to vaporize the entire mountain. It just needed to seal the exits and let physics do the rest. A single B-2 Spirit can carry up to 80 JDAM guided bombs, each at 500 pounds, or it can be loaded with massive ordnance penetrators, the 30,000-pound bunker busters capable of punching through more than 200 feet of hardened earth and concrete at over 625 miles per hour. 4 to 6 B-2s appear to have been deployed in the March 1 strikes. CENTCOM later confirmed that the aircraft were armed with 2,000-pound bombs, consistent with the BLU-109 warhead variant that analysts had anticipated would be the weapon of choice for collapsing tunnel entrances rather than requiring full cave destruction. Satellite imagery that began emerging after the strikes showed Iran's Tabriz North missile base with collapsed tunnel entrances. Exactly the outcome the strike logic had been designed to produce. A radar installation at Zahedan Air Base was gone. Drone and cruise missile storage bunkers in Kunarak were confirmed destroyed. And crucially, each of those strikes made Iran's carrier threat, the ballistic missiles that had been keeping U.S. Navy carriers at arm's length in the Persian Gulf, incrementally less credible. Iran's retaliatory wave hit hard across the region in terms of geography. A drone struck near the U.S. consulate in Dubai, triggering fires but causing no fatalities. U.S. facilities in Bahrain, home to the Navy's 5th Fleet, absorbed fire. Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait was targeted. Qatar's Al Udeid Air Base, forward home of CENTCOM components, reported explosions in its vicinity. The UAE's Al Dhafra base, home to the 381st Air Expeditionary Wing, took strike attempts. Jordan's Muwafaq Salti Air Base saw 2 ballistic missiles, both intercepted, with only material damage. 4 American soldiers were confirmed killed on March 1st at the port of Chiba, Kuwait. Captain Cody Cork, Sergeant Noah L. Tygens, Sergeant Nicole Armour, and Sergeant Atticlin Cody, members of the 103rd Sustainment Command. Their deaths are the human cost embedded in every strategic briefing, and I think it matters to name them rather than fold them into aggregate casualty figures. These were real people. I spoke with Asha Castleberry, a U.S. national security analyst and former Kuwait desk officer at U.S. Army Central. Her read on Iran's counterstrikes was clear. They were expected, and they reflect a pattern we've seen before. Iran is not structurally designed for prolonged conventional war. Its doctrine leans on asymmetric harassment, proxy networks, and terror cells, embedded across Gulf states, tools that are effective at generating noise and casualties, but don't translate into sustained offensive campaigns against a fully mobilized U.S. force. Her assessment: this conflict likely doesn't run past 30 days before diplomacy finds an opening. Now I want to be direct about something that a lot of military-focused coverage keeps dancing around. This is also a domestic political story, and pretending otherwise misreads how decisions actually get made in Washington. Trump launched Operation Epic Fury without the kind of pre-coordination with European allies that characterized both the 2003 Iraq campaign under Bush and the 2011 Libya intervention under Obama. Spain refused U.S. military access through its bases. The UK's Keir Starmer faced public pressure before ultimately, and significantly, reversing course on March 1st, announcing that the U.S. would be permitted to use RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire and Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean for future B-2 deployments. That's a big logistical win. It cuts the bombers' round trip from the current 32-hour marathon runs out of Whiteman, Missouri, and reduces dependence on KC-135 aerial refueling tankers. But the larger political question Washington is actively debating is whether this war was a genuine response to an imminent threat or a war of choice. That framing matters legally under the War Powers Resolution, and it matters electorally heading into the 2026 midterms. If the strikes succeed in permanently crippling Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, Trump has a generational foreign policy victory. If they produce a wider regional conflagration with mounting American casualties, the political calculus flips entirely. There's also the question no one in this administration seems to have a clean answer for. What comes after? Supreme Leader Khamenei was confirmed dead by Iranian state television on February 28th, with a 40-day mourning period ordered. A 3-member interim council has been formed to manage the succession question. But there's no public U.S. strategy for what post-regime Iran looks like. Just a vague framework in which Trump has mentioned knowing 3 potential leaders and has reportedly held talks with Mustafa Haji, president of the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, while CIA discussions around arming Kurdish resistance forces were reportedly underway. Iran is not Iraq. It is more than 3 times the size and population, more decentralized in its power structure, and has decades of experience managing internal dissent. The concern that a sudden power vacuum in Tehran could produce a Syrian-style fracture across a far larger country is one that analysts are raising quietly, even as the strikes continue. Here's my own take on what happens in the next 30 days. Iran's missile stockpile, estimated at over 3,000 before this operation began, with ambitions to reach 8,000 by late 2027, is being eaten away from 2 directions simultaneously. Strikes are destroying existing stores and production facilities are being damaged faster than they can be repaired. Israeli officials have claimed that roughly half of Iran's missile capabilities have already been shut down when you combine the current operation with earlier June 2025 strikes. About 200 ballistic missile launchers are confirmed destroyed, with dozens more rendered inoperable. That trajectory points toward one outcome. Iran's threat window is shrinking by the day. The question is whether Tehran calculates that it has more to lose by continuing than by accepting the off-ramp Trump has publicly described. Essentially a halt to nuclear and missile program reconstruction in exchange for a ceasefire. The fact that the UK just opened its forward bases to American bombers suggests the next phase of strikes. Likely carrier-based FA-18ES from the USS Abraham Lincoln, now able to operate at closer range as Iran's ballistic missile threat is degraded, yet will be even faster and more sustained than what we've seen so far. Iran's Leadership Council knows this. Whether knowing it is enough to bring them to the table before the next wave hits is the only question that matters right now. One Iranian-American engineer named Masoud Godrat Abadi, speaking to CNBC after Khamenei's death, called it the best day of his life, expressing hope that it marks the beginning of something genuinely new for Iran. Millions of Iranians share that hope. Whether the next chapter is written by them or by another faction of the regime scrambling to survive is still an open question. And it may be the most consequential one of the decade.